A couple that are friends with my parents sailed from France to Africa, then to South America. They also didn't have all the proper equipment you are supposed to have in order to do this legally and as safe as possible. They were a week or two away from the end of their trip when they confirmed their feeling of not being alone. At night, they'd think they'd hear another ship, but no sight of anything. They'd hear water breaking from something, but never saw why. This continued and seemed to be getting closer. Then, just a few days before the end of their trip, an American submarine suddenly surfaced near them. It stayed afloat for a while, then went back under. His theory was since they didn't have a proper sat radio, they weren't aware they were being hailed to identify. The American Navy was probably like, WTF is this, and kept track of them, or even followed them for days/weeks. At the end, the Americans were probably even more curious, surfaced, saw a bewildered, sunburnt French sailing couple, cursed, and went back to doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. I'm a marine biologist. While at uni, I went out to the deep ocean on a scientific cruise. We were trawling about 800 meters, pulled up the ketch. I found a hermit crab. What was cool about this was it wasn't in a mollusk shell, but was in a hard anemone. The anemone had a bottom part that was hard and hollow, perfectly fitted for the crab. On top was 2 clusters of stingers. It was an awesome little symbiotic relationship in which the anemone gave the hermit crab shelter and protection, and the crab presumably moved the anemone to food. Anyway, I tagged and bagged it for another scientist to look at. I never followed what happened with it. I tried to search if it had been discovered. I couldn't find anything. It could have been a unique discovery. I worked on an offshore oil drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico for a number of years. I know I saw a lot of things that were interesting to me, but I don't know about anyone else. The one thing that sticks in my mind right this minute is standing on the empty bow of the barge, 150 miles off the coast of Louisiana, and seeing a flight of huge manta rays swim/fly by below me in a jet-like V formation. I think there were maybe 9 of them together, and it was beautiful. So, me being a 19-year-old, I chucked a big piece of metal off the barge at them, a drop of about 90 feet. I didn't hit any, but they peeled off and dove like a formation of jet fighters going down in an attack. I had no idea they behaved like that. I've never heard of anyone else mentioning seeing it before either. Have any of you? That wasn't very nice. While on a sailing cruise returning to Miami from the Bahamas, I was permitted to pilot the boat while the crew sat down for dinner. I was told to simply follow a certain heading on the compass. As we were going along, I noticed the position of the sun was rather rapidly changing as I was chasing the heading on the compass. I returned to what I thought was the correct heading and watched in amazement as the compass began to spin in circles. We had been scuba diving, so several of us had compasses, and they were all exhibiting the same behavior. The heading on the GPS was unaffected. After maybe 10 to 20 seconds, the spin slowed to a stop, back on the correct heading. The crew logged the coordinates of the anomaly. The best guess we had was that we'd crossed over an old shipwreck, perhaps something hauling a large amount of some magnetic metal over to the Bahamas. Not a fisher, but spent some time at sea. Used to work on an oceanographic research vessel. Doing box cores and piston cores of the ocean floor brought up all kinds of things. Coke cans, a magic marker, etc. If you're on an old steamer trade route, you bring up a lot of clinker coal, which is the burnt-up coal from the old boilers that they put over the side. It's possible to analyze the clinker coal and determine what general area it was mined in England or Europe, the US, etc. One fun thing we used to do was lash a small net bag to the cable that held the box core, and we'd put styrofoam cups in it. As the box core and its cables would descend, sometimes several thousand fathoms, the cups would compress due to the pressure. We'd haul up the box core, and in the bag would be perfect little styrofoam cups a half-inch high. We had hundreds of them. Also once saw a whale swimming by, mid-Atlantic, that was trailing a load of fishing gear, nets and some high flyers. Was not pleasant to see. I can't believe I'm so late to this question. I do quite a bit of saltwater fishing, and anytime I'm on a chartered boat, I always ask this question to the captain. On a blackfin tuna trip out of Key West 3 years ago, I asked the question, and without thinking or blinking really, the captain said, "A dead elephant in the middle of the ocean." I'll never forget that. Same captain also told me that while tied behind a shrimp boat not far offshore, his client pulled up a large grouper with a human knee joint and muscle/flesh inside its mouth. They went back to shore and contacted the appropriate authorities to let them know a shrimper had possibly dismembered someone and tossed them in the ocean. Weird stuff. My dad owns a fishing boat, so we used to go offshore fishing very often when I was younger. I have a few not-so-creepy stories. First one was on our trip in the Florida Keys. We were maybe 30 miles offshore, no land or other vessels in sight. We were hauling ass away from some quickly approaching storm cloud when I saw a funnel cloud appear. It was kind of eerie being an 8-year-old and seeing this shit a few thousand feet behind you, knowing that if it got close enough to us and we didn't make it, no one would ever know for a long time and there's nothing we can do about it. Another time, when I was about 10, we were trolling for fish 40 miles or so off the coast of Bimini, Bahamas, and this large lump floated within a few feet of our boat. It was a dead sea turtle, a pretty big one too. We gaffed it, flipped it over in the water, and there was a huge baseball-sized hole straight through its underside, and it went all the way through its body until it reached its shell area. It was like a neat cylinder had been carved out of its body, and it looked flat black. I don't know if it was just rotting, but it almost looked charred. Turtle also had numerous hooks and cut lines coming out of its mouth, which is pretty normal for dead ones. We set it loose, still no idea what happened to it. This last story I thought I had dreamt or something until I asked my dad about it recently, and he confirmed it. I was around the same age as my last two stories, and we were offshore fishing for pretty much all day. I don't remember if we were on the Gulf side or Atlantic side, but the water was seriously deep and blue. We must have been many miles offshore, and looking at the sonar, I remember it being much deeper than 2,000 feet. Anyway, about midday, bored 10-year-old me was sitting on the roof of our center console, and I see this dark shape about 20 feet under the surface. It was seriously huge and definitely not a whale or anything. It was man-made, a gigantic submarine, and it was right next to our boat, like 20 feet away. It stayed next to us for about 60 seconds, then submerged slowly and went on its way. It was so creepy seeing it out in the middle of absolutely nowhere and knowing that there were people right inside of it. Oh, my time to shine. I was fishing in Florida, Gulf Coast, for grouper that we were going to eat later that evening. So me and a few buds go out to this common wreck that sits on top of a pre-existing reef. No luck, but this isn't a problem. We will just go out further and go for tuna/dolphin. The fish also known as mahi-mahi. So as we head out to this drop-off, dolphins, the actual marine mammals, start following us in our wake. Now this isn't uncommon whatsoever. I watched them blissfully while the rest of my friends were looking on the charts for where to start our drift. All of a sudden, the dolphins are gone. This sort of eerie feeling comes over me, and one single, smaller dolphin is in our wake. Then a massive column of water erupts from behind us. I see a red cloud where the dolphin would have been. That's the closest I've ever been to shitting myself. My instinct is to run to my friends and get a line in the water. They were dismissive, but it happened near the drop-off anyway, so they turn around. They can see the slightly diluted cloud of blood where the dolphin was. We get a line in the water, and after 5 minutes it keels over and snaps. We get one with a wire lead in the water and nothing bites. Honestly, it was a mako or maybe a great white shark, but it was just the strangest thing that's ever happened while I was fishing. Oh, and we caught a 75-pound yellowfin that day, and it was some of the best fish I have ever eaten. My dad, who is as rational of a scientist as you can possibly be, has experienced very vivid hallucinations that he truly believed were real at the time. His friend's family had sold a sailboat to a buyer up the eastern seaboard, so my dad and his friend, young amateur sailors, decided to sail the boat up the coast and deliver it. This was in the late 70s or early 80s, so I guess they didn't have the 24/7 crack news team of the Weather Channel telling them what was coming. Apparently a tropical storm was coming and they had no idea. It caught them when they were some ways from shore, with no exact idea of where they were. They had to just ride it out because going inshore in a storm like that was too risky when you didn't know the waters. They didn't sleep for several days while they had to fight tooth and nail to keep the boat above water. During that time, my dad says he saw all kinds of stuff in the ocean. Mermaids, the souls of the damned, you name it. Really shows you where all those old sailors' tales come from. This might not be what you had in mind, but what I saw at sea was humanity, minus the threat of repercussion. Fishing is a slaughter. I worked on a long liner off Kodiak. We brought thousands of fish over the rail, gutted them, and tossed them in the hold. I don't see anything wrong with this, but it is bloody, and I wonder if it relates to what I am going to say. There is no respect for the lives of the fish, but they are food and we need that, but it translates into other areas. For example, boats use crucifiers. These are illegal. They rip the hook from the fish, sometimes ripping off the head. It's pretty gross, but it saves time. Not pleasant for fish, but oh well. Dolphins, killer whales, sea lions, stuff that tries to eat your fish, your livelihood, your money, aren't as protected as you might think. And seagulls, well, they follow all boats. In downtime, the guys shoot them off the stern. I have seen guys catch them in nets, hold them by the head, and spin their bodies around until the neck tears and the body flies, squirting blood everywhere. In a lot of ways, fishing was the best job I ever had. For the most part, people were judged by their contributions rather than their race or their politics, etc., but there was some shitty stuff too. Not strangest things seen or heard, but more felt. I was spearfishing a wreck off the west coast of Florida and found a neato den of Goliath grouper, each in the 400-pound class. Now these are a protected species, so I'm not allowed to shoot them, but going in a little closer to get a good look seemed like a good idea. Now when a Goliath grouper feels threatened, they can drum their gill plates, which creates this underwater boom, 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 which makes your whole body vibrate. Now imagine like 5 of these bad boys just vibrating the shit out of this wreck, and I'm in 40 feet of water, very aware that I hold no power down here. I had to wash that wetsuit a little more thoroughly. Gross. My father was a fisherman, and we used to live on the boat with him. When I was about 5, he put me in a tote full of seawater and then dropped a hagfish in there, so there's that. He also fished with a man who would shoot sharks with rifles. One of his buddies was trawling off the BC coast back in the 80s when he snagged something with his net. Despite being under power, whatever he had started towing his boat backwards at about 7 knots. He eventually had to cut his nets with an axe or be dragged out to sea. Probably not Godzilla though. Locals guess it was a US or Soviet sub being sneaky. Another fellow trawled up a 2,000-year-old Greek amphora in deep water not far from Tofino. Museums offered him a bunch of money for it, but he keeps dried flowers in it instead. Not quite deep sea, but couple hundred feet for salmon, off Half Moon Bay, California. Slow day and my brother pulled up this weird translucent pink dildo-looking sea creature. So captain comes down and he goes, "Been fishing these waters 20 years and never seen one of those." Then he goes and takes a little nibble of the creature. About 10 minutes later he comes down and goes, "Okay, my lips are numb and slightly burning. I would suggest nobody else try that," and returns to the captain's seat as we all laugh our asses off. Nothing happened in the end. 1. A whole bunch of balloons, like a big old clump of them, probably about 100. I don't know if it was some sort of buoy or something like that, but just a whole bunch of them. 2. We once caught a whole bunch of metal nuts on a string, used as weights while deep dropping. 3. Multiple fish that no one could identify. 4. A bunch of apples and oranges floating in a clump. 5. A sunfish. 6. Other fish no one could identify. 7. A cruise ship in the Gulf of Mexico. There's likely way more that I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's the signs of intelligence I've seen in the ocean that I found to be the most strange. Off the coast of Ventura, California, I watched 3 gray whales mating for an hour and a half. As it was explained to me, two males will have a mild brawl, and the losing male will then hold the female in position so that the dominant one can impregnate her. Essentially, they're such big creatures that it takes three to tango. What was strange about it, though, was the volume of other sea life that was present. There was an entire column of seals jumping in and out of the water in front of them, as though leading them in procession. There were also dolphins everywhere, like pretty much as far as you could see in all directions, dolphins would be appearing. All these life forms, us included, were surrounding these whales as they motored up the coast of California. It was something straight out of The Lion King, and suggests that these creatures have relationships that we don't even begin to fathom. Fishing in the Whitsundays in Australia, we hooked up to a large wahoo or barracuda. We brought it to the surface, and a second wahoo was swimming around the other one in an apparent state of real distress. It seemed to me that it was the partner of the other creature and was genuinely concerned for its mate's safety. It wasn't trying to eat it. The fish was relatively calm on the surface, but then I moved into a position to gaff it, and it seemed as though when the animal saw the gaff it panicked and started trying to dive deep again. My mate had done a lousy job of tying on the lure, so we lost it, but I'll admit that I have never felt so glad to lose a trophy fish. I've caught loads of fish over the years, hundreds if not thousands, yet this one still really haunts me, and truthfully made a major dent in the amount of fishing I still do. Everything about the experience told me they were animals with significant intelligence. Scuba diving and snorkeling with giant cuttlefish. They're incredibly beautiful and seem to have real intelligence. Octopus are too, but they're much less curious and more elusive. I've also had some interesting encounters with moray eels. I think we vastly underestimate the intelligence of marine life. One other quick story. I know an old bloke, bit of a rough diamond, used to be a pro fisherman. We were once watching some guys dropping crab traps all into the same area. He said to me that they were idiots because all animals have a distress call, and once you capture one, all the others will flee, in so many words. And I realize there are great evolutionary reasons for a species to warn its kin of impending doom, but I can't help but ponder whether it too suggests to a more sophisticated mode of existence than we give the humble crab credit for. Sure enough, and in spite of maybe 20 traps, we watched them pull up one single crab the next day. My grandfather was mossing on the east coast of Canada when he saw something with a horse-shaped head surface from the water, look at him, only to disappear back to the depths. I was a kid when he told me the story, and I sort of forgot about it until I came across some information about a cryptid called the Cadborosaurus. From there I discovered a news article covering the story of fishermen spotting a very similar thing, half an hour from where my grandfather claims to have seen it. I guess the caddy has been spotted as far north as Alaska and as far south as California.